Chief Ashton Coldwater was a man carved from the very bedrock of Harmony Creek. He was more than just a police chief. He was a local legend, a symbol of unwavering integrity. His uniform was always crisp, his gaze steady, and his voice a reassuring calm in the storm of small-town troubles. People trusted him implicitly, seeing him as the guardian of their peaceful existence. He had earned every medal that adorned his chest, each one a story of bravery, a testament to his dedication. Ashton wasn't just respected, he was revered. He was the man you called when things went wrong, the man who always made them right again, a bastion of honor in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. His reputation was built on years of service, of putting himself on the line for the people he swore to protect. He had faced down armed robbers and talked desperate souls from literal ledges. Children waved at his patrol car and old-timers tipped their hats as he passed. He was a fixture at town hall meetings, his presence a promise of order and safety. Ashton embodied the ideal of a lawman, a figure so righteous that his name became synonymous with justice in Harmony Creek. He was the town's protector, its moral compass, a man whose word was as good as solid gold. His legacy seemed secure, etched into the very foundations of the community he so diligently served. He carried himself with an air of quiet confidence, a man comfortable in his own skin and secure in his place in the world. His life was a public record of good deeds and selfless acts. He was the first to arrive at a crisis and the last to leave, ensuring every detail was handled with precision and care. When the river flooded its banks 2 springs ago, it was Ashton who organized the sandbag lines, working tirelessly alongside volunteers, his sleeves rolled up, his face etched with determination. He was not just a leader who gave orders from a distance, he was a man of action, a hands-on hero who led by example, earning loyalty through his own sweat and sacrifice. The town saw him as infallible, a pillar of strength that could never crumble. His life seemed an open book, its pages filled with commendable chapters of public service and personal sacrifice. He was the man who had cleaned up the drug problem on the East Side, the one who had established the youth outreach program that kept kids off the streets. Every action he took seemed to reinforce the narrative of the perfect chief, the flawless hero. No one in Harmony Creek could have ever imagined the darkness that lurked just beneath that polished, decorated surface. They saw the uniform, the badge, the steady hand, but they could not see the man hidden within, a man capable of a terrible, devastating secret. Ashton and Stella Coldwater were the town's golden couple. Their life together was a carefully curated image of domestic bliss. They lived in a charming colonial house on Maple Avenue, complete with a white picket fence and a garden bursting with Stella's prize-winning roses. She was a gentle soul, a librarian with a love for classic literature and a smile that could light up a room. Their marriage was seen as the bedrock of their shared life, a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection. They hosted the annual police department barbecue, their laughter echoing across the manicured lawn as they moved among their guests, the perfect hosts, the perfect pair. Stella was the quiet strength behind the town's hero. She supported his demanding career with grace, understanding the long hours and the constant pressure. She was his confidant, his soft place to land after a difficult day. At town events, she stood by his side, a picture of elegance and devotion. Their love story was a local favorite, a tale of high school sweethearts who had built a beautiful life together. People pointed to them as an example of what a marriage should be, steadfast, loving, and enduring. Their home was a sanctuary, a place of warmth and comfort, a stark contrast to the harsh realities Ashton often faced on the job. They had routines that spoke of a deep, shared history. Sunday mornings were for the crossword puzzle, their heads bent together over the newspaper at the kitchen table. They took long walks in the evening, their hands intertwined, their conversations a low, comfortable murmur. To the outside world, their bond was unbreakable, a fortress of love and commitment. Stella's friends envied her seemingly perfect life, her handsome, heroic husband, and their tranquil existence. She was the heart of their home, her presence filling every room with a sense of peace and rightness. It was a life that seemed too good to be true, a flawless painting hiding a deep, ugly crack. But a picture, no matter how perfect, is still just a surface. It cannot show the silent tensions, the unspoken words, or the secrets that fester in the quiet spaces between two people. The smiles they shared in public were a well-rehearsed performance, a mask for the fractures that had begun to form in their foundation. The loving glances were a habit, an action performed without the feeling that once gave it meaning. Their beautiful house on Maple Avenue was not a sanctuary, it was a stage. And on that stage, Ashton and Stella played their parts with practiced ease, fooling everyone, perhaps even themselves for a time. The truth was a different story, a darker one. The secret had a name, Chloe. She was a young, ambitious journalist who had arrived in town to cover a high-profile case Ashton had solved. She was sharp, alluring, and everything Stella was not. The affair began with hushed conversations in dimly lit diners, a spark of excitement in the monotony of Ashton's life. It quickly spiraled into something more, a dangerous obsession that consumed him. He felt a rush he hadn't experienced in years, a thrill that was both intoxicating and terrifying. With Chloe, he wasn't the town hero. He was just a man, flawed and desired. This secret life became his escape, a dark corner where his pristine reputation held no power. Guilt was a constant, gnawing companion. It sat with him at the dinner table across from Stella, its cold presence a third party in their quiet meals. He would look at his wife, at her kind, unsuspecting face, and feel a wave of self-loathing so intense it was almost suffocating. He was living a double life, a lie that grew more complex with each passing day. The man who stood for truth and justice was now a master of deception, his life a tangled web of carefully constructed alibis and whispered phone calls. The affair was a poison, slowly seeping into every aspect of his existence, tainting everything he once held dear and corrupting his very soul. He told himself it was just a phase, a temporary lapse in judgment that he could control. He promised himself he would end it, that he would recommit to his marriage and be the man Stella deserved. But the pull of the affair was too strong, a current dragging him further and further from shore. Chloe represented a world without responsibility, a world free from the immense pressure of being Chief Coldwater. With her, he could shed the weight of his badge and the expectations of an entire town. The guilt was a heavy price to pay, but the escape it provided felt, in those stolen moments, like it was worth it. The lies became second nature. He invented late-night emergencies and fictional work trips, each deception a small tear in the fabric of his integrity. He grew distant from Stella, the easy intimacy they once shared replaced by a strained silence. She noticed the change, of course. She would ask if he was okay, her eyes filled with a concern that only deepened his shame. He would reassure her with a hollow smile and another lie, pushing her further away to protect his dark secret. The man who had once been her anchor was now adrift in a sea of his own making, and the storm was gathering on the horizon. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was from one of his own officers, his voice strained and hesitant. There had been an incident at the Coldwater residence. Ashton's blood ran cold. He raced home, the siren wailing, his mind a chaotic whirl of fear and dread. He found Stella in their bedroom. She was gone. The scene was still, silent, and utterly devastating. The world tilted on its axis, and the life he knew shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In that moment, the weight of his betrayal came crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. This was his fault. This was the consequence of his choices. Panic set in, a cold, suffocating wave. His mind, trained for crisis, went into overdrive, but not to find justice for Stella. It worked to save himself. He saw the affair, the arguments, the motive that would point directly at him. He saw his life, his career, his entire world crumbling to dust. And so, he made a decision, a choice born of pure, selfish fear. He would not let the truth come out. He would not be the prime suspect in his own wife's murder. He had to control the narrative, to shape the story before it could be told by anyone else. He had to make it look like something else entirely. With methodical, trembling hands, he began to alter the scene. He moved things, wiped surfaces, his actions a grotesque parody of the meticulous police work for which he was known. He was no longer a grieving husband or a chief of police, he was a criminal covering his tracks. He placed a bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand, and a note, forged in a shaky imitation of Stella's hand, beside her. Suicide. It was a plausible story, a tragic but simple explanation. It was a lie that could save him, a final, monstrous betrayal of the woman he had once sworn to love and protect forever. The act felt like a desecration of their shared life. When his officers arrived, they found their chief in a state of carefully orchestrated shock. He played the part of the devastated husband, his voice breaking, his eyes filled with a convincing display of grief. He was the victim, the heartbroken man who had come home to an unimaginable tragedy. He let his colleagues comfort him, their words of sympathy like acid on his guilty conscience. The deception had begun. He had set the stage, and now he had to perform the role of his life, a performance that would determine his fate. He had crossed a line from which there was no return, stepping from the light into an eternal, self-made darkness. In the days that followed, Ashton moved through a fog of manufactured grief. He was the very picture of a bereaved husband, his face a mask of sorrow. He accepted condolences with a somber nod, his eyes downcast. He meticulously planned Stella's funeral, choosing her favorite hymns and flowers, each detail a carefully placed stone in the wall of his deception. He was acting on a public stage, and every gesture, every word, had to be perfect. The town wrapped him in its collective embrace, offering support and sympathy, completely unaware that they were comforting the architect of their sorrow. His hypocrisy was a suffocating weight. His internal struggle was a silent, relentless war. During the day, he was Chief Coldwater, the stoic leader navigating an unspeakable personal tragedy. At night, alone in the empty house that was once their home, the facade crumbled. The silence screamed with accusations. Stella's ghost haunted every room, her memory a constant, painful reminder of his betrayal. He would see her face in the mirror, hear her voice in the creak of the floorboards. Sleep offered no escape, his dreams filled with images of her lifeless eyes and the feel of the forged note in his hand. He was a prisoner in a jail of his own making, tormented by a guilt that gave him no peace. The deception required constant vigilance. He had to remember every lie, every detail of the fictional narrative he had created. He reviewed the case file, pretending to search for answers he already knew. He spoke to his officers about the investigation, guiding them away from any path that might lead to the truth. He was using his knowledge, his authority, his very position of trust to obstruct justice. Each conversation was a tightrope walk, each question a potential trap. He felt the strain of his dual existence, the constant fear of a slip-up, a single mistake that could unravel his entire lie and expose him for the monster he had become. He also had to manage Chloe. She was a loose end, a dangerous variable in his carefully controlled equation. He met her in secret, his tone harsh and commanding. He told her to stay quiet, to forget they ever knew each other. He used threats, veiled in the language of concern for her safety, to ensure her silence. He was manipulating her just as he was manipulating everyone else in his life. The affair that had once felt like an escape had now become another chain, binding him to a web of deceit that grew more tangled and suffocating with each passing moment. He was no longer in control, the lie was. Trust in a small town is a fragile ecosystem, and soon the first seeds of doubt began to sprout. It started not with the public, but within his own department. Detective Miles Corbin, a veteran officer with a keen eye for detail, was the first to feel a prickle of unease. He had known Ashton and Stella for 20 years. The suicide note felt wrong, the handwriting just a little too deliberate, the sentiment not quite Stella's voice. Corbin didn't voice his suspicions aloud, not at first. He just watched his chief, observing the subtle inconsistencies in his story, the fleeting moments when the mask of grief seemed to slip, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. The whispers began in the quiet corners of the precinct, by the coffee machine and in the hushed confines of patrol cars. Younger officers, who had once idolized the chief, started to exchange questioning glances. Why had the chief been the one to find her? Why had he touched things at the scene before the forensics team arrived? These were small things, easily explained away by shock and grief, but they began to add up. The official cause of death was suicide. The case was closed, yet an unspoken current of doubt flowed through the department. The hero worship that had once surrounded Ashton began to slowly, almost imperceptibly erode. Community suspicion grew more slowly, but it was just as corrosive. Stella had been a beloved figure, and her sudden, tragic death left a void. Her closest friends, the women from her book club, found it impossible to believe she would take her own life. Stella had been making plans. She had just ordered new bulbs for her spring garden and was excited about a trip she was planning. They talked amongst themselves, their conversations filled with a sad, growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. They remembered Ashton's recent distance, the shadows they had seen in Stella's eyes. Their grief was tinged with a suspicion they dared not speak too loudly. Ashton felt the shift. He saw it in the way his officers avoided his gaze, in the polite but strained conversations with old friends. The town's embrace, once a source of comfort, now felt like a tightening noose. He became more defensive, his grief sometimes giving way to flashes of anger when questioned too closely. He tried to maintain his composure, to project the image of a man wronged by tragedy, but the cracks in his performance were beginning to show. The whispers grew louder, spreading from the police station to the town square, a low murmur of doubt that threatened to become a roar. The hero was becoming a suspect in the court of public opinion. The investigation, officially closed, was unofficially reopened by Detective Corbin. He couldn't let it go. Working on his own time, he started digging, quietly and methodically. He began with Stella's phone records, a simple procedural step that had been overlooked in the rush to close the case. There, buried in the data, he found it. A series of calls and texts to a number he didn't recognize. The number belonged to Chloe, the journalist. A quick background check revealed she had been in town during the same period Ashton had claimed to be working late on a string of cold cases. The first solid crack in the chief's story had appeared. Corbin's next step was to analyze the suicide note. He sent a copy to a handwriting expert in a neighboring city, off the books. The report came back with a damning conclusion. While the signature bore a resemblance to Stella's, the body of the note showed signs of forgery, the pen pressure and letter formations inconsistent with her known writing samples. It was a careful imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. Corbin now had physical evidence that contradicted the official story. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, investigating his own superior, but the truth about what happened to Stella demanded to be heard. He was no longer just suspicious, he was certain. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Corbin decided to interview Chloe. He approached her carefully, not as a suspect, but as someone who might have information. At first, she denied everything, her fear of Ashton palpable. But Corbin was persistent, his quiet, steady demeanor chipping away at her defenses. He showed her the phone records, the evidence of their communication. He spoke of justice for Stella. Finally, in a flood of tears and guilt, Chloe confessed. She told him everything about the affair, about Ashton's controlling behavior and his desperate call to her on the morning of Stella's death, warning her to stay silent. With Chloe's testimony, Corbin had enough to bring his findings to the district attorney. The case was formally reopened, and this time the target of the investigation was Chief Ashton Coldwater. The news hit Harmony Creek like a seismic shockwave. The official investigation into their hero, their protector, was unthinkable. The whispers that had been confined to quiet corners now erupted into public debate. The town was divided, some refusing to believe the accusations, others seeing their quiet doubts horribly validated. The foundation of trust upon which the community was built had been shattered, and the truth, in all its ugly detail, was about to be exposed to the light. The arrest of Chief Ashton Coldwater was a surreal spectacle. The man who had put handcuffs on hundreds of criminals now felt their cold steel snap around his own wrists. He was led from the precinct he once commanded, his face a stony mask, refusing to meet the eyes of his former colleagues. The cameras flashed, capturing the downfall of a hero. The image of the decorated chief in the back of a police car was broadcast across every news channel, a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. The town watched in stunned silence, their sense of security and order completely annihilated. The pillar of their community had not just crumbled, it had been a hollow facade all along. The trial was a painful ordeal for everyone involved. The courtroom became the stage for the public unraveling of Ashton's life. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. The affair with Chloe, the forged suicide note, the inconsistencies in his timeline. Stella's friends and family wept as they listened to the details of his deception. Ashton sat in the defendant's chair, a shadow of the powerful man he once was. His defense was weak, his lies collapsing under the weight of the evidence. He was no longer a respected chief, but a common murderer, stripped of his uniform, his honor, and his dignity. The fall from grace was absolute and brutal. The verdict was guilty. The community that had once revered him now saw him for what he was, a man who had sacrificed his wife, his honor, and their trust to protect his own selfish secrets. The consequences rippled outward, devastating everyone he had touched. His children, if he had any, would bear the shame of their father's name for the rest of their lives. Stella's family was left to grapple not only with her death but with the horrific betrayal by the man she had loved. His fellow officers felt a deep sense of disillusionment, their faith in the system they served shaken to its core. The town of Harmony Creek was left with a deep, gaping wound. Ashton was sentenced to life in prison, his days to be spent in a cell, a world away from the life of respect and authority he had once known. The prison walls were a physical manifestation of the trap he had built for himself. He was left with nothing but time to reflect on the choices that had led him to this end. He was haunted by the memory of Stella, not as a ghost, but as a symbol of the goodness he had destroyed. The tragic consequences of his actions were not confined to his own ruined life. They were a legacy of pain and sorrow that would linger in Harmony Creek for years to come. The story of Ashton Coldwater serves as a dark and cautionary tale. It is a stark reminder of how a single selfish choice can set off a catastrophic chain reaction, destroying not just one life but the very fabric of a community. His betrayal was not a single act but a cascade of them, starting with infidelity and ending with murder and deceit. Each lie he told was a crack in the foundation of trust, and soon the entire structure came crashing down. The loss was immense, the loss of a vibrant woman, the loss of a hero, and the loss of a town's innocence. It shows how the pursuit of personal desire, unchecked by morality, can lead to utter ruin. The cost of betrayal is measured in broken hearts and shattered faith. The people of Harmony Creek had placed their trust in Ashton, believing him to be the embodiment of integrity. His downfall forced them to question everything they thought they knew, not just about him, but about the nature of good and evil. How could a man capable of such bravery also be capable of such cruelty? The question lingered in the air, a poisonous miasma that tainted their sense of safety. Trust, once broken so profoundly, is nearly impossible to fully restore. The scar on the town's psyche was deep and permanent, a constant reminder of the hero who became a monster. Ashton's legacy was not the medals on his chest, but the pain he left in his wake. He became a byword for hypocrisy, a ghost that haunted the police department and the town he once served. His story is a tragic exploration of human frailty, of how even those who seem strongest can be brought down by their own moral failings. His inner world, a battleground of guilt, fear, and ego, ultimately consumed him. He chose to protect his reputation over his humanity, and in doing so, he lost both. The respect he had worked so hard to build was erased in an instant, replaced by infamy and contempt. In the end, the tragedy lies not only in the death of Stella Coldwater, but in the death of an ideal. Ashton's story reveals the terrifying truth that darkness can hide in the most respected places, behind the most trusted faces. It reminds us that integrity is a fragile thing, requiring constant vigilance and moral courage. One wrong choice, one selfish act, can unravel a lifetime of good deeds and leave behind a legacy of sorrow. The echoes of Ashton Coldwater's betrayal would resonate through Harmony Creek for generations, a somber lesson on the devastating and inescapable cost of a secret life and a broken promise.